Welcome everyone to this full moon Sidereal Astrology forecast. This is for Thursday, January 12th, 2017. I'm Athen, and this channel is about using the actual constellations in the sky, known as Sidereal Astrology. If you are new, be sure to check out the link down below because the signs are different. All right, so full moon here today on Thursday, very illuminating time as it often is with the full moon. But there's a lot of aspects. I think this is a very significant full moon and is, of course, the first one kicking off the new year. So the full moon is going to be in Gemini, first of all. So the sign here is about the Geminian qualities of things. And as I often say with the full moon, it's a good time to do the status check, right? And particularly a status check with the Gemini qualities. And these are things like our thinking patterns, things like communication, sharing our relationships in a more surface level interpersonal way of sharing ideas and maybe business and trade and that more surface stuff with relationships. Also just generally learning, are we open to learning in life? And I think most fundamentally with Gemini, it is about really doing this examination of our thinking patterns, especially with a full moon, because the sun's in Sagittarius, which is another mental kind of energy. It's another sign that has to do with understanding. And as I've been talking a lot about with Sagittarius, that's been more about the belief systems and the possibilities and the potentials in thinking big. But Gemini is the immediate thoughts, right? The everyday thoughts. And so how are those everyday thoughts? What are we thinking about? Because everything we think about on an everyday level shapes that reality, shapes those possibilities and potentials, the manifestation of the ninth house. And that's really a great way of balancing these two areas is to, yes, think big, right? Have those positive affirmations and all of that, but at the same time, really be aware of our everyday thinking patterns and even what we say too, again, communication. What are we saying? What are we speaking? These are all things that certainly shape our reality, shape us, our well-being, etc. So I think generally it's a great time to do a status check with this. Also, if there is anything in your life that does involve a bit of communication, maybe cultivating that some more, learning more about that, or just generally more about communication. Also things like learning, which could be direct learning, such as through books or courses or studies, things like that, doing a status check with that and continuing with those areas. But maybe just generally about, do you have an openness to learn about life, right? Do you have that sort of playful attitude, which is what the twins represent, of treating life as a learning place, of sharing, of learning, of experiencing, in that innocent way. So, and that's really what lifts things up too, when we approach life with a willingness to learn and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, it really does free us up and really does help us access that playful side of Gemini. So that's the full moon, generally speaking, with the signs, but most importantly, there's a lot of aspects with this. As you can see, there's a grand cross. We've got these squares forming up with all immutable signs, Gemini, Pisces, Sagittarius, Virgo. And we've also got some trines up to Mars and Chiron, who have been a big player. Mars has been sextiling up to Pluto. So let's go ahead and look at this grand cross. Very significant when this happens. And it does mean important changes and shifts in our life. And sometimes we're thrusted into these changes or shifts, or maybe it's more immediate or it's more challenging. This is what the square represents. It's almost like the tire meets the pavement and it's time to take the action steps. It's time to initiate, right? It's time to actually move things forward. And not to mention, we do have all the planets forward moving direct, minus the nodes, which naturally move retrograde, but all the planets are direct, which is very significant, suggesting that things are moving forward, and we do have that support to do that. But with the Grand Cross, it might take that extra intention to do so. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about it first in terms of this opposition up to Pluto. It's been a very transformational time since last weekend too, when the sun went over Pluto. There was a lot of new perspective shifts with that Sagittarius energy and probably freeing ourselves up in many ways. Because essentially what Pluto's about is stripping away all of the security and all of the attachments, the things that we feel comfortable with, that we hold on to, like a security blanket. And Pluto's job is to strip that away, okay, and for obvious reasons, so we can transform, change, and live a life that's much less attached and much freer. So with that, with this opposition, I think we are, with this full moon, presented with those attachments right now. I think we are presented with those fears, those securities. And I think it's very important with this opposition is to be aware of them, first of all, to accept that we have them, and then last, to free ourselves from them. And once we're free, in other words, we're no longer attached. We're no longer bound to them. We're no longer wanting to control, own, or possess these things that help us feel secure, or go into these things that help us feel secure. We're okay with letting go as best as we can. There's always layers with Pluto. All right, there's always more room for growth, but as much as we can, whatever is comfortable for us, right? Releasing those attachments, freeing ourselves up, and then as a result, making the change we want to see. You know, it's the classic example of when we're free, when we no longer care about how something's going to turn out or what direction something's going to take. What happens? We're free, and then we're free to make the actual changes we want to see, right? We liberate ourselves. So I think that's very important with this Pluto energy, but of course it's within balance and moderation. Again, doing the work, right? With the square, with Gemini, the immediate environment, being aware of how we're thinking and all of that practical stuff. But in either case, yes, facing those fears, accepting them, those attachments, and as a result, that can be very, very freeing. It's really the attachment, the acceptance that releases those attachments. All right, so that's the Pluto side to it. Of course, the squares with Uranus and Jupiter. Let's start with Uranus. Uranus has been helping us have more peace in our life, particularly the peace that comes from when we free ourselves up. You know, these outer planets are very deep, very transformational. And the type of freedom that Uranus represents is the one that's about listening to our that voice, you know, our true self. And our true self has been calling us for many years in Pisces to have more freedom with letting go, with detaching from everything that's outside of our immediate control. Now, of course, we've got Virgo, which is everything in our immediate control, and there's plenty of opportunity to do this, whether it's your personal development, your growth, your work, things, again, just like Gemini on that everyday sphere. Lots of opportunities here to expand with personal development at the moment. But Uranus in Pisces is about letting go of what's outside of our immediate control, which is everything essentially that's outside of us, right? The only thing we actually do have control over is our actions, how we respond to things, right? So anyways, this can be very freeing. And if you are feeling during this full moon like there is a bottlenecked kind of energy, you are wanting to break free, break through, which is the square up to Uranus. It's about being aware of that as well, right? Awareness there. But the key with Uranus is listening to that. There's something there. There's something to implement to where you can have, where we can all have more freedom in our life. Spiritual freedom of letting go, of detaching and accepting. So very powerful there. And again, that can be very constructive. And you do want to, implement this in constructive ways, which is what the square is all about, without going to any extremes, of course. Now, the other side to it, the Jupiter I was talking about, is that, yes, there's lots of opportunities, I think, for, seeing the potentials. But there's also this swing with Jupiter, in a square. It's sometimes we might be over-optimistic. Then other times we might be not optimistic at all, pessimistic. And there's this pendulum swing going on. And how Jupiter's placed in your chart will probably determine more so what direction that is. But it's usually a little bit of both. So if you're feeling like there's a lot of possibilities, great. If you're feeling like there isn't, that can be constructive too. It's about finding the balance point with this, about healthy, constructive growth. Healthy, constructive pursuit and action towards these possibilities and potentials without us just expecting it to fall into our laps. This type of square is where things don't just fall into our laps. This is about taking the action and the initiation. And with Jupiter, it is about those possibilities and potentials. And doing the work with Virgo, which is about being more aware of our personal immediate environment, ourselves, our self-improvement, how we respond to things. So anyways, that's what the mutable energy is all about. Mutability is all about adaptability, taking the information that we have. If it's Gemini, it's quite literal, the mind, the information. If it's Sagittarius, maybe it's the life path, these larger things, these possibilities. If it's Pisces, it's the immediate information in the present moment of once we've surrendered, let go, and detached. And with Virgo, it's the immediate in terms of what is our environment like, and do we have that approach of improving things immediately and all the information our environment's telling us. So anyways, adaptability, very big with the mutable signs, taking what we have, implementing them, and moving them forward, okay? And challenging ourselves with the Grand Cross. That's essentially what this time period is about. And it can be very constructive. Be patient. This is another thing, the Grand Cross, the squares, all represent what Saturn represents. And for those of you who understand the energy of Saturn, it's about patience. It's about taking things slow, taking the action steps, but understanding that things take time and seeing the big picture. Okay. And over the next coming 3 months, 6 months, 9 months in this cycle, we are going to notice a lot of these things unfolding that maybe we're initiating or continuing to initiate right now. Because a lot of the stuff we did start was back in October when we had a lot of these conjunctions, like the Sun was conjunct Jupiter, then we had Mars conjunct Pluto, the Sun was opposite Uranus. So that was 3 months ago, was in many ways a beginning. This is almost like a beginning with the Pluto side to it, which is about making the transformation and changes that we want to see, but might require that accepting of those fears and releasing those attachments or securities. All right, so that's the Grand Cross. Let's talk about this trine up to Mars. There is support with this. There is an easy element to this, and this is the fact that Mars, which represents our desires and the type of action, which is about pursuing the things we want, is here. There is support with that. I think collectively we do have the intention. I think we do have the energy. Relatively speaking, the motivation, the drive is there. All right. Now, obviously, there's challenge with those other areas I mentioned, but there is support to take action. So utilize it. Utilize that Mars energy. Mars is just like a square in the sense that it is about action, but it's about slowly but surely getting that momentum moving. All right, one step at a time. That's what Mars is about. Aries is about. It's about just taking that first initial step, and then as a result, the next step becomes easier. Then the next step becomes easier and easier and easier, and just building momentum that way. Also, too, there could be awareness about our personal needs and all this kind of stuff, which is really good at the moment also. And again, Mars sextiling Pluto is that is very much supporting the change. And it's very much supporting this transformation that's occurring at the moment. Now, Chiron, the other side to it is that there is healing, and I think that's very supportive. I think that's going to come easy. I think the healing is naturally happening. I think with this full moon and this week, there's this refreshment, this overall theme of rejuvenation. Okay, and this is particularly with, on some regard, we do have a willingness to go with the flow and let go and detach, and that's been Chiron healing us in Pisces. All right, so that's the full moon. Simply, looked at, essentially what we've got here is we've got a lot of aspects in this Grand Cross, which essentially represents that this is a transformational full moon, particularly with the mutable signs, with Gemini, being aware of our thinking patterns. How are we thinking? What are we saying? Do we have that openness for life to learn, all right, and go with the flow and adapt and see where things take us? And that's what the mutable signs are all about, with Pisces being present, accepting, surrendering, with Virgo working on our personal growth and our improvements and everything we do have control over, and with Sagittarius thinking big, seeing that life path, expanding our horizons, but again with Pluto facing those fears to do that. So that's the full moon, and again a lot of support from Mars with that action energy and some healing too. So that's the way I would sum this up. Now here's the transit grid. As you can see, the full moon will be at 07:33 Eastern time. Okay, and here's all the aspects we just talked about leading up to that full moon. The sun is going to be squaring up to Jupiter today exact. So again, this pendulum swing, it's important to be patient right now, but there is possibilities and potentials, and just seeing the big picture with it and taking it one step at a time. Now, Venus is conjoining Neptune, so we are starting a new cycle here today. We'll probably feel this the second half of the day, and this is a new cycle with our values and maybe even relationships. And it's particularly about all that Pisces type of energy I was talking about, but here with our values and relationships with Neptune, which is about letting go and surrendering. Okay, so I think it's a new cycle starting with detachment, with lessons or experiences around detachment when it comes to relationships, when it comes to our values, and it could even be, the material values as well, but all things we value. So the more willing, and this is a neutral aspect, so I think collectively we are willing to do this, but it's about learning about the importance of things coming in divine timing, particularly with the things we value or want to connect to in life. And with that, though, with the presence, which is certainly available, it can be very enjoyable right now. Venus and Neptune go very well together. All right, so this can be very enjoyable for easygoingness. spiritual activities, meditation, prayer, all this kind of stuff. And even too, a very good dreamy and imagination, dreamy perspective and imagination. So for you creative types, this is a very creative energy. It's also very romantic. And the key, of course, is not to project anything into the future with this all. It's to be present with it. And it's in that presence that this is a very tranquil, very easygoing, very peaceful conjunction. And again, starting a new cycle with lessons or experiences around that detachment. All right, and it's unconditional too, with Neptune. It's all about just accepting things and people and our values for how they are and being grateful as well. All right, so that's the day in a nutshell. That's the full moon in a nutshell. Hope you guys have an awesome full moon, and I will see you all tomorrow for the weekend report. All right, take care.